All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we take these really complex, sprawling subjects and distill them down into clear, actionable frameworks. Today, we are tackling a seriously massive topic: mastering the Microsoft Power BI ecosystem. To truly wrap our heads around the end-to-end data project lifecycle in Power BI, I want you to think about it like building a house. You don't start by picking out the living room curtains, right? You start by surveying the land, laying down a rock-solid foundation, running all that complex electrical wiring, and then, finally, connecting the whole thing to the city grid. And just look at the sheer scale of the Power BI universe here. It's massive. Notice how your data sources map out on the left, funneling straight into data modeling and DAX right there in the middle, before just exploding into a vast array of outputs, real-time analytics, and enterprise governance on the right. Honestly, it is incredibly easy to get completely lost in this ecosystem if you don't have a structured approach. And that's exactly why we're using our house-building analogy today. We're going to tame this complexity together. So to keep us on track, we've organized this builder's journey into 5 digestible stages. 1. The Power BI landscape. 2. Foundations of data modeling. 3. Mastering advanced DAX logic. 4. Interactive versus paginated reports. And finally, 5. Enterprise deployment and scaling. Okay, starting off with Stage 1, the Power BI landscape. Before we even think about pouring any concrete, we've got to survey the land. That starts with the single most important question you absolutely must ask before touching any software. What are you actually trying to track or change? As developers, it is so easy to fall into the trap of just building exactly what a user asks for, like some massive, endless table of unorganized data, without ever really understanding the underlying business outcome. Look, if a report doesn't align with a core KPI or a specific business process that actually needs to be improved, it's going to be looked at maybe 5 or 6 times and then completely forgotten. You have to clearly define the outcome first.
Moving right along to Stage 2, Foundations of Data Modeling.
Now it's time to pour your reinforced concrete foundation. To prevent it from cracking later on, you must establish the grain of your data. Basically, what is the lowest level of detail you need? Think about going to the supermarket. Is the grain of your data the single printed receipt for your entire visit? Or is it the individual line items on that receipt? The milk, the bread, the fruit. Deciding this up front is critical because it's always way more challenging to try and go down to a lower grain after you've already built your model. In modern tools like Power BI, where storage and compute are so highly compressed, it's almost always best practice to go to the lowest necessary level of detail without over-engineering the whole thing. Next up in our foundation phase is the classic data architecture debate. Should you use a star schema or a snowflake schema? Now, if you come from a traditional enterprise database background, you might naturally lean towards a snowflake model, where tables are highly normalized and broken out into tons of separate interconnected pieces. But is that really the right move for Power BI? Well, actually, the Kimball star schema is almost always the winner for Power BI. It groups hierarchies, like region, territory, and state, into single wide dimension tables that surround your central fact table. While the Snowflake schema is fantastic for writing data into a system super quickly, it forces the reporting engine to jump through multiple hoops and tables. The star schema, on the other hand, is naturally optimized for Power BI's compression engine. Plus, it's just incredibly user-friendly. Business users can literally just drag and drop a ready-made hierarchy onto their visual without having to hunt across 5 different tables to build a single chart. It's a real game changer. Which brings us to Stage 3, Mastering Advanced DAX Logic. If the data model is your concrete foundation, DAX is the complex electrical wiring that powers the logic of your house. And I absolutely love this quote from our sources because it really hits the nail on the head. Mastering DAX requires more than just memorizing formulas. Writing fast, scalable DAX is not about remembering syntax off the top of your head. It's about deeply, truly understanding how the internal engine evaluates your data. And to really get that engine, you have to demystify 2 core concepts: row context and filter context. Row context is exactly what it sounds like. It's when DAX evaluates a calculation row by row, typically using iterator functions like SUMX. Filter context, on the flip side, is the environment surrounding your data. It's how calculations are dynamically modified by external slicers, report filters, and visual interactions before the math even happens. Grasping the fundamental difference between these two, well, that's the aha moment when you truly become a Power BI professional. Once you've got context down, you can really start leveraging DAX's heavy hitters: time intelligence functions. Functions like total YTD and same period last year are absolute lifesavers. Have you ever tried writing a rolling year-over-year comparison manually? It's a literal nightmare. These functions completely automate those complex date comparisons and rolling averages, effortlessly maintaining the original filter context while dynamically shifting the date ranges for you.
But hey, I do want to give you a quick warning here. Manipulating that filter context is incredibly powerful, but it can also be a bit dangerous. Overusing functions like all or remove filters can severely cripple your performance, especially on large datasets. Instead of leveraging your existing filters, it forces the DAX engine to scan the entire massive dataset entirely from scratch. So use them intentionally, or you're going to find your report slowing to an absolute crawl.
All right, moving into stage 4, interactive versus paginated reports.
So now we're basically designing the interior of the house where the business users actually interact with all that finished logic. The first rhetorical but absolutely crucial question you have to ask your users when designing a reporting layer is, does this need to be a pixel-perfect printed invoice? Asking this upfront immediately helps you determine the correct visual output for whatever the business requires.
You see, there's a pretty hard line between the two main types of Power BI reporting. Standard interactive reports are built for exploration. They dynamically resize, and if a table has too much data, it just gives you a handy little scroll bar. But think about it. If you print that, the scrolled data is just gone. That is exactly where paginated reports come into play. They are designed for pixel-perfect, print-ready layouts, things like sales invoices or operational reports. They handle controlled data overflow beautifully, expanding margins and repeating headers across multiple pages completely automatically. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
And finally, Stage 5, Enterprise Deployment and Scaling. To securely connect your finished house to the wider city grid, an enterprise architect first has to look at how data is stored and refreshed. You essentially have 3 main options here. Import mode pulls the data directly into Power BI's incredibly fast, highly compressed cache. Direct query, however, leaves the data right at the source, offering near real-time updates but potentially slower performance since it's querying the database live. And finally, live connection connects directly to existing enterprise models like analysis services. Knowing exactly when to use which mode is how top architects balance massive data volumes with the business's demand for fresh data. When you're rolling out Power BI to an entire enterprise, you're no longer just building reports. You are managing a massive IT ecosystem. Establishing robust governance, administration, and formal planning is critical here. Who actually gets a Power BI Pro license? How do we organize workspaces? Who is officially allowed to certify a dataset as the single source of truth for the entire company? Making these governance decisions early ensures your city grid doesn't just turn into the Wild West.
And speaking of that city grid, if you have data living safely behind your corporate firewall on premises, you need a reliable way to securely connect it to the Power BI cloud. That's exactly where the data gateway comes in. The high-level steps are pretty straightforward. You install the gateway, configure it for the enterprise, usually opting for standard mode rather than personal, associate your specific datasets, and then schedule your automated secure refreshes. This whole process ensures your cloud dashboards always reflect your secure on-premise realities.
And just like that, it brings us to the end of our build. We've surveyed the business requirements, poured a rock-solid star schema foundation, wired up our advanced stacks, painted the interior with the right mix of paginated and interactive reports, and connected the whole shebang to the enterprise grid. The tools are undeniably powerful, but it's this structured methodology that actually makes them work. So, your foundation is set, your data is modeled. The real question is, are you ready to apply these best practices and scale your insights to the enterprise? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep building.